Launch from Pad 34 was scheduled for 21 February 1967. Splashdown would occur 14 days later on March 7th in the Atlantic, just north of Puerto Rico. The primary recovery ship would be the aircraft carrier Essex. As pilot, Roger Chaffee would man the right-hand couch and would serve as a systems engineer for the flight. He would be responsible for monitoring the operations of the environmental control and life support system, the electrical system, and communications. This was to be Roger's first flight into space. He was the first member of his astronaut class to be selected for an Apollo mission. Maybe he would have certainly brought all the enthusiasm and dedication of a first-time flyer to his job. This being his first flight, he might have also spent a little more time marveling at the view of the Earth, and Gus may have had to call him away from the window a time or two. Roger would have also certainly looked out of that window and been struck by the beautiful and constantly changing view of the home planet. With every orbit, changing cloud patterns and sun angles would make each sighting new and different. An occasional view of moonrise over the Earth's limb would remind him that there was so much more work to be done in order to accomplish our national goal of a lunar landing by the end of the decade. Roger would have surely orbited the moon one day or landed on its surface. As senior pilot, Ed White would occupy the center couch. His primary responsibility during the flight would be to oversee the guidance and navigation system in the lower equipment bay. Once in orbit, Ed would have taken his place in the nav station in the lower equipment bay. There he would mount two eyepieces to the spacecraft telescope and sextant. Using these instruments, he would target certain stars and mark their position in the navigation computer. The computer would then be able to calculate the vehicle's position, attitude, velocity, and orbital period. This system, which would eventually guide American astronauts to the moon and home again, would be tested in Earth orbit for the first time on this flight. Ed was a professional test pilot, but one who never failed to appreciate the unique nature of his job. His enthusiastic descriptions during his spacewalk on Gemini 4 in 1965 brought the beauty and excitement of that adventure home to every man, woman, and child who heard it. After the flight, he told the press about his faith in machinery, and his crewmate Jimmy Pivot, and his faith in God. Ed was a man who could appreciate the big picture. After all, he had seen it for himself. Looking through the telescope and sextant, Ed would have surely been deeply moved by the fact that the stars he was using to navigate were the exact same stars used by Columbus, Magellan, and Da Gama. He would have felt his place in the continuum of exploration. He would have certainly commanded a mission to the moon one day. Gus? Well, as everyone here knows, Gus was a test pilot's test pilot. His head would have been squarely in the cockpit as he methodically assessed every system on his vehicle, noting the ones that worked, the ones that didn't, and how all of them could be improved. You weren't going to get a lot of golly gee whiz jazz from him. They had tried. During Gus and John Young's flight on Gemini 3, the spacecraft was entering its third and final orbit. During the pass over the Cape, the air-to-ground comm would be fed live to the radio and television media. As Gemini 3 approached, Flight Director Chris Kraft implored Capcom Gordon Cooper to see if he could get Gus to say a few words. Okay, chuckled Cooper, he probably knew what the response would be. As Gemini 3 came into contact, Gus reported on the thrusters, the guidance platform, and the other systems. And finally, Cooper asked, how's the weather look in general around the United States? Gus replied tersely, very cloudy. We see very little land. Everyone in Mission Control must have smiled and nodded their heads at that one, and a few dollars probably changed hands too. Gus wasn't there to talk about the beauty of the planet or the lights of Earth. He was there to put the Gemini spacecraft through her paces for the very first time. During that mission, he became the first man in the world to change the altitude and flight path of his vehicle, making him the world's first space pilot. Now, does all this mean that Gus took no joy from what he did? Of course not. But as an engineer and test pilot, beauty was not found out the window, but in the successful performance of a spacecraft which he had helped to design and which he had flown on her first flight. It was knowing that these maneuvers that he was performing would someday be the key to rendezvous and docking, and would eventually lead America to the surface of the moon. And there was joy, I know, because it was captured on film. As Gus and John stepped onto the deck of the recovery ship Intrepid, the film shows them being greeted by NASA officials. After a brief conversation, Gus looks up to walk across the deck. And as he looks up, you can see it just as plain as day. A big, broad smile that could power 50 aircraft carriers. A smile of pride and satisfaction that comes with the accomplishment of a great and difficult task. And what did Gus expect after Apollo 1? Well, from the writings of D. Slayton, Chris Pratt, and others, there can be little doubt that Gus would have certainly been the first man to set foot on the moon. These are the men we honor today, not cold alabaster statues in a museum, but flesh and blood men with dreams and aspirations. Men with families and loved ones. Men who knew the satisfaction which comes from being a part of a great and important enterprise. Men who knew the risk and accepted it. Men whose dedication, sacrifice, and whose very lives ennoble us all. Godspeed to Apollo 1. Joining us now is Captain John Sager of the United States Navy of the Naval Ordnance Test Unit here at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station.
Good evening. 2 years ago, my theme for the ceremony was Let's Remember. Last year was We Remember. So this year, on the 50th anniversary, I want to make it a little bit more personal and tell you that I remember. If we gather today to honor NASA's Apollo 1 crew, Lieutenant Colonel Gus Grissom, United States Army Air Corps first, and then the United States Air Force, Lieutenant Colonel Ed White, United States Air Force, and Lieutenant Commander Roger Chapman, United States Navy. Yes, a soldier, sailor, and airman. I remember growing up on the west coast of Florida during the space program's growth, watching with a kind of amazement that only kids can fathom, imagining myself blasting into space like our astronauts here at Cape Canaveral. I remember being very young and so proud of my dad, who was enlisted in the Navy and wanted to follow in his footsteps to become a soldier. I remember learning about the Apollo 1 tragedy and the second nuclear-powered submarine, USS Scorpion, sank in the Atlantic just 1 year later. I remember the early days of our space program, trying to grasp the astronauts' incredible scientific knowledge and wanting to be just like they were. Every kid dreamt of being an astronaut, and I was no different. But I was also lucky to be a Florida kid. I was able to witness many of the launches here at the Cape in my backyard. I remember excitedly watching and thinking, that would be my dream job. I remember attending my first Blue Angel show, wanting to be a pilot because the sky had no limits due to the American Space Program. I remember acing the pilot aptitude test, being told I could fly any aircraft that I chose,